Hello and back. Welcome back. I can't even say that right. Welcome back this week to Together We Feel. I'm so happy to be here with this panel today. And you will recognize one of the names because she was just on with me as a guest on the F.E.E.L podcast a few months ago. In November, her episode dropped. And then the other friend, I have been on her podcast. You have yet to hear from her on the F.E.E.L podcast, but you will be soon. Don't worry. And I reached out to both of them, inviting them in to be part of this Meet the Difference Makers conversation today. And because one, they're both very much difference makers in the spaces they inhabit. And so they're going to have a ton of resources to offer you if these are areas that you or a friend or a loved one need to tap into. They also have podcasts of their own for you to add to your listener week as you're going on your walks and driving to work and dropping the kids at soccer practice and all the things. But also, too, as a reminder to all of us as women that we all have the capacity and ability to be difference makers right where we are. And thinking about that thing that lights you up, that gets you up in the morning, that story that's part of you that could help somebody else. There's so many ways to tap into that. And so I think by hearing from both of these women today, you're going to get both the resources that are wonderful and really great wise insights, but also that reminder of the power within you. And so that is my hope today as I welcome Rachelle Davis and Glen Alex to the show with me today. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with me. I appreciate your time. Rachelle, we're going to start with you. For those that haven't listened to your episode yet, that dropped back in November on the F.E.E.L podcast, tell people about you and how it is you got on the road that you are today in helping people.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Melissa. I'm happy to be here once again. So I have always had an interest in natural healing, even as a child. And I would always read books and whatnot on different natural remedies. But it wasn't until, later on in life where I really decided to do something with it. And even though I did still carry a lot of those principles and habits with me throughout my life, I became a holistic health coach. I was certified in 2013. And prior to that, I was working overseas while studying for that. And it was through that work where I was working such long hours and I was stressed out that by the time that I arrived back in the US, I was experiencing all these different symptoms, having difficulty sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night with hot flashes. And let me think what else, gut issues, just a whole range of symptoms. And so I had not realized what I was going through until I went to a seminar on stress. And it was through an acupuncturist that actually diagnosed me with all my symptoms. And one really weird, unusual symptom I don't know that a lot of people experience is elevated blood pressure. So I had gone to my VA doctor because I'm a veteran and I'd gotten a physical and she noticed that my blood pressure was elevated and wanted to put me on medication, a small dose of blood pressure medication. And I immediately said no, because I stopped taking medication so many years ago. And, so anything I do, it's going to be natural. So I said, let me find a natural way to deal with this, whether I need to add something or change something, in my lifestyle. Well, later on, when I went to that seminar and I had that acupuncturist give me a physical, he was able to tell me that usually with chronic fatigue syndrome, your blood pressure is flipped. So when you're sitting down, which would normally be the resting position, your blood pressure is elevated. When standing, which would be the working, your blood pressure is lower. So that was kind of something different that I learned about chronic fatigue syndrome that a lot of people probably aren't aware of. But it was through that experience where I decided, I'll do a couple of treatments with the acupuncturist. But then I decided that I was going to learn and study and research exactly what was chronic fatigue and how to heal myself. And so I did heal myself. I created a whole regimen, food to eat, when to eat it, food to stay away from, that type of thing, exercise that was appropriate for my condition, just a whole different lifestyle I had to create to heal myself. And so today I have, my podcast,
Yeah.
which was developed to help other people like myself who have experienced or are experiencing chronic fatigue syndrome. And I introduce them to different alternative professionals who can help them on their healing journey. And a lot of different alternative professionals where people may not have heard of them or may not have understood, what they do or how they can help. But surely, besides acupuncturists that help me, there's so many out there that can help people, and even more than just chronic fatigue syndrome, they can help them with.
Okay. Thank you for that. I love how you took, and this is what I love about women. We are really, really good at taking our own stories and using them as an inspiration. Once we find resources that help us, we want to help other people. Like, wait a minute, I got to let other people know about this. I got to let other people know about what's possible so that they don't have to suffer or go through or wait as long as I did. And that's exactly what you've done here. And I love that so much. All right, Glen Alex, why don't you share your background with us? You also work in the world of health, but in your own way.
Yes, my work is about total health. My life's work has been about health, which began in childhood. It started with boundaries. I was just struck by watching people interact. And I was just fascinated by that interchange and the dynamics. And I could tell when boundaries were respected and when boundaries were violated. And so my interest in matters of health just grew from there and into other areas. I express my interest in health through clinical social work, through my book, Living in Total Health, and the new one that's coming later this year, through my podcast, which each episode of the Glen Alex Show focuses on a different aspect of health, because I want to address the wholeness, the whole person, because all of us matter. And I am so convinced that if more people were living in total health, were physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually balanced, then this world would be a much nicer, much more loving place and safe for everyone. So it is my goal to reach as many people with that message as I can. I am doing teletherapy. I work with adults who experience anxiety and depression, relationship issues, boundary issues, just stress and overwhelm, to help them tap into their inner resources so they can make the best decisions available to them and have the healthiest and highest quality of life available. So that's my story.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you were able to tap into early the boundaries and how people interacted and that connection of that. It's one of our talking points on our podcast, F.E.E.L podcast, a mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health connection. They're all tied together. They're all tenets that need to be tended to. And if we ignore any of them, it's going to come up in not a healthy way at some point.
Absolutely.
And so that is just how important that is, and the importance of talking about that and having resources and tapping into that and understanding this is part of your healthcare. Rachelle, you talked about all the different people that you bring on, that you feature, that are available to tap into. Sometimes our traditional medical practices that we've been using and utilizing don't have the answers. And so knowing more and more, there's other options available. There's other resources out there. You both took your curiosity and your resources and have brought them for people to tap into now, and even broader because you both decided to bring it to a podcast format. So it can literally reach people around the world. I mean, there's so much power in that. both of you work in areas that have a lot of stigmas and stereotypes and assumptions and preconceived notions and other people's expectations around them. And we all talked about, and Glenn and I got into this conversation as we were going back and forth last week about this discussion of, we live in a world that is waiting to define us and put us in some kind of a box by where we come from, what we look like, what we work in, what our socio and economic status is, who we're partnered with, what our faith space is. I mean, I could go on and on and on. There are people waiting to throw us in a box. As women, as little girls, we get scripts, and I talk about this on the podcast all the time, very early on, of what we're supposed to be showing up as, how we're supposed to conduct ourselves. And at some point, we have to come to our own kind of reconciliation with, wait a minute, is that script serving me? Or do I need to step back and make sure I'm living in true alignment with myself, showing up and working and giving my time to spaces that honor that and not allowing other people to pigeonhole me? And so, Glenn, I'll go back to you. Start with you about that, your experience with that, because it's layered. I mean, this is the Embracing Layers Network. There's a lot of layers to this. So talk to me about that.
Well, let me first clarify that my work around spirituality is not about religion. It is about the individual's authentic connection to themselves.
Yeah.
And it's about how well aligned their choices are with their identified beliefs and values. Because we espouse saying we believe in one thing and then we'll make choices that defy that. So that's what I mean by spiritual. As far as being pigeonholed, the first thing that comes to mind for me is I am a certified teaching coach. Tennis was the love of my life before my husband came along. It's now number 2. And so I taught beginners to play tennis, and I coached them. And it is a male-dominated field. And I received a lot of pushback and a lot of negative feedback and gossip because I was basically the only woman who was out there trying to recruit new players and actually do the hands-on teaching with them. So I was pigeonholed in that way, and that was not fun. Although they didn't break me, they didn't stop me. I pursued, listened to my own voice, and that just that inner spark, because tennis is one of the greatest sports on the planet, and it has all these different health benefits, mental, physical, emotional, and even spiritual. And I was determined to share that with as many people as I could. So I didn't let that pigeonholing hold me back, because I should let the male coaches take the lead. No.
Oh boy. I mean, all the spaces it shows up in, and that's another example. Go ahead. It's just like, wow.
And as far as being a social worker, the pigeonhole there is that I should be soft and fuzzy and just listen and not tell or direct or share. Just be this soft, squishy little thing and give people whatever it is they want in the moment. No, I'm not doing that, because it may not be what's best. It may not be appropriate. I worked with patients and in dialysis, and one of them was actually bringing alcohol into the clinic in a steel cup, and the nurse allowed it. And so this patient was having issues. The nurse asked me to talk to her, and I did. And I didn't poo-poo her. I just said, this is not appropriate, X, Y, Z. And so my boss was upset with me because I wasn't soft enough with her. And I'm like, well, that's the problem.
Yeah.
You can't be soft with someone who is bringing alcohol into a medical facility. right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that it just wasn't. I said, people, she needed this boundary set.
Yeah.
And so I get that a lot, that social workers are supposed to be this way. No,
Well, and you can't, you should not be enabling people in their bad behavior that's a
yes.
harm to them and to
Well, we
other
don't want to
people.
hurt
And
anybody's feelings.
oh my gosh, I mean, I think that's a really. I'm so glad you brought that up, because we can be empathetic and accountable at the same time. They don't
Absolutely.
have to be mutually exclusive, and I'm going back to the layers again, but we are nuanced, we are layered, but we're also capable of holding multiple positions and multiple ways of approaching things at one time. And that's a classic example of no one's winning here by
Right.
enabling her to do this thing. And so it's like, at the end of the day, you did the most, not only because it was the rule, it was, what in the world? That's not good for her. She's in dialysis, for heaven's sakes. I mean,
Right.
so I thank you for that example. Such a good example. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, one more example that comes to mind is in the business setting. I served on boards and, have my own company. And whenever I am not whenever, but too often when I'm working in a male setting, there are these overtones of sex.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't subscribe to that, didn't give in to that, didn't follow that, then there were actually a few male counterparts who stopped speaking to me or who tried to block what I was doing. So
Wow.
that's another stereotype that pigeonholing that really frustrates me, that the assumption is I will sleep with you, and I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I'm going to compromise who I am and
Right.
my value system to do something, which is just like, yeah. And I think it's important to speak those things up and speak truth to that and bring it up, because there's this idea that we've moved past that or moved beyond that. No. Do not misunderstand. It might look a little different or be in a little different package, but it still exists. And we have to continue to bring light to it and also support each other in it. I think I'm a really, really big proponent of women supporting each other unapologetically and not looking at each other as the competition, but as, if you win, I win. That creates more space for all of us. And here, I'm in a space here. I've got a few more deposits in the bank. So I'm going to back you up when I see so-and-so interrupting you or trying to derail you, because we need all of us together to make spaces safe for women and all the places we go into, to make spaces safe for people seeking therapy, for people seeking help. That leadership and accountability don't have to look like one thing in one box. There's multiple ways to peel the onion and to approach something. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many ways still that we're not getting to where we need to go, but it's by speaking these truths and bringing these things up that we can continue to bring light to them and not let them get swept under the rug. So thank you for all those examples. Those were so good. And I appreciate you bringing light to that. And I want to go back to being the only woman coaching and working with players in tennis in that space. These things are still happening so much today. Back in the fall, my daughters were volleyball players. It is shocking how still it's a very male coach dominated sport. More times than not, they had male coaches rather than female coaches. For the first time in NCAA Division I history, a female coach won a national championship last fall. And it was also the first time that the NCAA championship had both. It was going to happen either way. Both teams were coached by women. That had never happened before. And a woman had never won before. So either way, it was already a win for women going into that national championship. But it is it's 2025 now. This was fall of 2024. And even with all the progress that's been made, we're still in these scenarios and situations. And that's why it's so important for us to speak truth to our experience of what's happening, but also show up and support each other so we can continue to create space and narratives. Both of these coaches, obviously very competitive. They wanted to win, but both of them were the first to acknowledge women's volleyball is winning today. Regardless of which one of our teams wins, women's volleyball is winning. This is a win for women today. And it was a really great example of that. So thank you for sharing that. And being a advocate for yourself, but also bringing it up for other women to be aware of. And it's okay for you to be an advocate for yourself. So all of this is part of the difference making piece. It's not only working in areas, but how are you conducting yourself in those areas that allows you to continue to grow, be true to yourself, live by your values, and honor spaces and places so we continue to grow these opportunities for women. So many things there. All right. Rachelle, talk to me about your experience with the stigmas and the stereotypes and the pigeonholing.
I would say I've always been a person that asks the question why, not just accepting everything that people tell you. For example, going to the doctor. I often will go to the doctor, and if I have an issue, they may prescribe something for me, and I'll be like, I'm not going to take it. I'll just tell them straightforward, I'm just not going to take that. And I know in, their profession that they've learned that, we're going to prescribe something. This is how we treat a person, but they're actually not treating you. They're just giving you a Band-Aid. Okay. So I've always been of the school of thought, okay, well, let me kind of try and understand exactly what's going on and see, if there's something that I can change or do something naturally to alleviate, or change my health in any type of way. So, yeah, a lot of times, they'll try and say, well, this is, our treatment for this or that. And I'll be like, well, I don't take any type of medication at all. So, it is what it is. And usually I'll go back and, like recently, I've had an issue with my thyroid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've gone back after however many months and my numbers have changed. And so she's like, okay, well, so let's just come back in 6 weeks and then we'll do some more blood work to see where you're at. But, she was pretty much telling me, oh yeah, you need to get on this medication, to try and alleviate or however they want to call it. I wouldn't say it was really a cure, but, they try to maintain,
Manage
your thyroid.
symptoms. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. She's like, oh, well, if that doesn't work, then, there's surgery, there's radioactive iodine or whatever. And I'm just like, nah, not doing it. Sorry. So there used to people that are like, okay, let me go, get the prescription and be on this medication for the rest of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That type of thing. So I rarely, especially when it comes to the doctor, allow them to talk me into situations because, in their profession, there's no other answer. And they can only go so far with their treatment, which is why with, for example, people with chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah.
A lot of times they can't even help the patient if they know what's actually wrong with the patient, and they'll treat them for all these different symptoms. And that person unknowingly will agree to be treated for all these different symptoms. They could have you on Adderall. They could have you on something for your insomnia. They could have you take something for depression, anxiety, what have you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to speak up for
Yeah.
yourself and advocate for yourself as a patient or in any situation. And if you don't understand something, ask questions, and don't let them talk you into anything, because a lot of these medications have side effects and you don't know how you're going to react to this medication that they prescribe for you, because after all, it is a practice. So that's my biggest thing. People have got to advocate for themselves. And even though they're the doctor, don't be intimidated.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're the patient, but they're not gods. Okay.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
doctors
Yeah.
and they can make mistakes too. And they're not always going to get it right every time, because it is a practice and everybody is different. And they're not trying to treat the whole person, holistically, as we spoke about before. It's one thing to be like, okay, you're experiencing all these symptoms. Let me give you medication. But, there's a lot of things that you can change that can help you, in the long run. It's
Yeah.
not just about, that medication and, trying to get past that symptom. It's everything you've done up until that point that's brought you to that moment. So, yeah, advocating for yourself. I try to speak up for myself. I don't just take, um, the word of a doctor,
Yeah.
and not ask questions.
Yeah. And that why, like I've learned to, well, why is that happening to my body?
Exactly.
Well, what else can we explore? Is there a supplement or some kind of food, something I can try? And I've learned to do this over the last 5 years. I used to not ask a lot of questions. And I learned in my own health journey that I was going to have to, if I was really going to get to the bottom of, but why? Okay. No, I'm not going to, I'm 55 years old. I'm not taking 10 pills. I don't
You're
need,
correct.
and with all of these side effects and all these different things and not looking at the whole picture. I mean, I've said time and time again, I firmly believe that your PCP needs to be communicating with your therapist. You need to be communicating with the people your dietitian or whoever all these people. And if you're your own dietitian, great. You're deciding what you journal that, keep track of that. We talked about that a lot with my friend Kim Moseman here a few weeks back, where write down your daily practices so you can keep track of changes that happen and find patterns that might bring certain things up in your system. I know that if I eat a certain way, if I don't have a certain type of movement or mental health wellness pieces involved, if I allow stress to kind of dictate my diet decisions and whatnot, my acid reflux is going to fire up. I'm going to have all kinds of repercussions from that. So I know that what I found a few years back, especially when I started going into menopause years, was my traditional doctors were looking at everything individually. Oh, your blood pressure is up. Let's put you on blood pressure medication. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is happening. Let's put you on that medication. I'm like, whoa. I think my blood pressure is tied to this anxiety experience I'm having right now.
Absolutely.
I'm in therapy for that. And I'm working through some things. So and sure enough, 9 months later, I was off the blood pressure medication because my blood pressure had gotten too low, because I had worked through things in my therapy that allowed me to level out and get to a more stable, my nervous system settled, and I was able to get to a stable way of being. All that to say, what we're saying here is don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask why. We have to advocate for ourselves. No one knows our bodies better than we do, or our experiences, or our story, or what we've been through. And Glenn talked about trusting yourself earlier, trusting ourselves and knowing that it's okay for us to push back, and it's okay for us to have a voice. And And if they're
Yeah.
not comfortable with that, whatever setting you're in, then it's okay to look for a different space where your voice and your questions and your curiosity will be welcomed, and not only welcomed, but encouraged as you work
Or
in.
even a different doctor too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I changed completely the type of medicine I sought and who I worked with. And I very much became my own advocate. And my mother-in-law was a great example of this. She had some scenarios that happened in her life that were a great example where she basically saved her own life one time by asking the right questions and not agreeing to wait 6 months for them to come back. And it was a very powerful reminder that is up, that I can do that. And it's important for me to do that and share that in these spaces. So you all have both shared some really powerful, important examples. But Rachelle, talk about the pushback. I mean, holistic medicine, and you can both speak to this. Holistic medicine and a holistic approach is still getting some pushback. Western medicine is very conditioned to treat a symptom, not answer a why, and put all the pieces together and look at the whole thing. So how do you handle that pushback? Rachelle, go ahead and go first, and then Glenn, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, some people just aren't familiar with a particular type of holistic practice, for example. So basically you just have to, open their eyes up to it. Maybe there's some type of reference that they can read or research. But there's so many different types of holistic or alternative practices out there that can help people. That's why I interview so many different practitioners on my podcast, because even more than just chronic fatigue syndrome, there's other things that they're able to treat that maybe aren't widely known. Things like lupus, there's a lot of people that suffer with lupus that, they get so far and then they're just kind of living with it on so many different medications. But there's so many different practitioners that have treated, various patients dealing with different things, and they're actually making a lot of great gains. So I would say that sometimes you just have to find the right practitioner to assist you. And it has to be right for whatever your condition, whatever you're dealing with. And, if that person resonates with you, then that's great. But it goes way beyond acupuncture, chiropractors, functional medicine doctors. There's homeopathy. Oh boy, there's so many. There's women that deal with somatic healing and trauma therapy.
Yeah.
And that's really big for people because a lot of people don't realize the trauma they're experiencing. And it's not just, as far as, you can go to a therapist, you can speak about, your past, what you went through, whatnot, but that trauma settles in your cells as well.
Yeah.
And it's just there in your cells. If you don't address it, then it's going to be there and it's going to come out in different ways. I learned stuff nonstop from these different practitioners, where I only thought about people with chronic fatigue syndrome. I guess getting to that point from stress, which is how I got to that point.
Sure.
But I never thought about the trauma in my life that could have very well contributed to that as well.
Yeah.
Because that's another contributor. It could be an issue of a virus. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But even, I guess, when you think about thyroid conditions too, that can come from toxins, after so long. Toxins from plastic, metal toxicity, that type of thing. And so, it's kind of important to try and structure your life and your lifestyle around healthy living,
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to live as healthy as you can.
Yeah.
And just be present in the moment and understand the things that you do and how they contribute to your life and your health.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved all of that. That was so good. And Glenn, I'm like, you're going to have a lot to say about that. So speak to that, because this is exactly what you're talking about, dealing with all those pieces, because if you don't, they will manifest themselves in disease, high blood pressure, heart disease. There's so many things that manifest physically that is stored trauma that's never been allowed to move out of our bodies. But talk to me about what you run into when people kind of push back on the holistic approach, because we're just, again, so conditioned to write a prescription and not ask more questions. But then also, talk about what you heard Rachelle say, and feel free to ask her questions or what it brought up for you as you were listening to her.
Well, I think you both said it very well, that it's the whole person. You have to deal with the whole person, because all of our aspects, the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, are interdependent.
Yeah.
So if you have a physical condition, there's a medication or surgery or some kind of procedure to address it. Yet if those mental and emotional issues are still present, that could just recreate it or create something else that goes wrong in the body. So I'm all about addressing all the components of physical health, mental issues, emotional issues, and even the spiritual well-being. What came up for me as Rachelle was speaking was my personal GI issues. Food allergies diagnosed in 2003. So I followed those along. And then the pandemic, was isolated except for going to work. And I did not gain 1 pound. Couldn't play tennis, couldn't, go out and do my normal stuff. And I was so proud of myself. 2021 comes when the world reopens. Then out of nowhere, I start gaining weight during exercise. I would play tennis in 100-degree heat and weigh 3 to 5 pounds more afterward. And so I started working on that and worked with a dietitian. She gave me some diagnoses and SIBO, histamine, and exercise-induced histamine intolerance. And there are medications for that. And I said, no, I don't want to take medications for that, because over the years, I recognized that my GI issues were getting worse and worse. And so I delved into the mental and emotional side. And what I recognized was that there were some events in my life that I hadn't healed, that I hadn't fully grieved or moved past. And once I started doing some inner child work on my own, then my colon started functioning so much better.
Isn't that true? I mean, for me, my issue is acid reflux, and that started showing up when I was 45 years old, so 10 years ago. And I'm like, and it was really there more than I realized. I was living so disassociated from so many things in my body that I think I just finally, my body started crying out to me for help. And so many times we see our bodies as being against us, when rather the fact that they're for us, trying to give us clues and let us know where she needs to be tended to.
Yes.
And so
symptoms are messengers.
Yes. That, exactly that. And I started seeing a correlation as I was tracking, like, wait a minute, there is a connection here to my stress levels, my anxiety levels, when what I seek in my comfort food, when I'm stressed and feeling anxious, which then affects my microbiome and my, all these things are playing, and I get canker sores when I'm stressed because the acidity's up, because I'm responding, not manufacturing and processing and moving through these things. And it's something I still have to be aware of today. I mean, I literally this morning or yesterday had an epiphany of like, the acid has been up, and I realized, okay, starting back during the holidays, I made these decisions and I've continued down this road for 4 to 6 weeks. And hold on a minute. I can't allow myself to go on that trajectory and not, I can have this thing here and here, but I can't have this running row and these things all played off of each other. And so again, making those connections, oh, that's why that's happening. So instead of running to get a Pepcid AC or which is really bad for you long term, I'm able to okay, what needs to be adjusted in my diet? Okay, if I get 8 to 10,000 steps a day along with my workout, I'm going to sleep better at night. And that's going to move these things through me, which is going to lessen my stress level. So I was, able to make all those connect points, but it's really important that when we are working with our practitioners, that we're sharing all these things and if they don't want to hear that, it's just like Rachelle said, then you have choices. You can do something different, but it's that advocating for yourself and being a voice and knowing that it's okay to ask questions. And just because they're an expert in a specific area doesn't mean you don't get to be curious and ask more and want to know why.
Exactly. And I ask my clients or strongly suggest them to be self-advocates. And I have clients who they might come to me before they start medication for some debilitating anxiety and depression. Once they start the medication and it takes the edge off the symptoms, they might stop therapy because they think it's the medication. The medication is going to fix it, and they don't know that there is a root cause to it, diving into the other mental and emotional stuff that created it in the first place.
Exactly.
And I have other clients who will stay in therapy and say, oh, the medication is working XYZ. And I'm like, well, you didn't do anything different. And once they recognize, they started walking more, they started meditating, they started journaling, they started being more vocal. That matters too, not just the pill.
Yeah. I think that's such an important piece too. If you're listening today, you just be mindful and know what it is you're putting in your body and why. And if you don't know why, start asking questions and start being curious so you can make sure that you're tending to all the areas in your life that need to be tended to and aren't just putting bandages on things, but not really solving the whole issue. And that's all part of just that living well within ourselves, living out F.E.E.L, finding empowerment, embracing our layers, asking the questions, being curious, and not just accepting. Because again, I think it goes back to, when we're as little girls, we're told, be nice, be kind, be polite, don't make a bunch of noise, don't cause trouble, be well behaved, whatever that means. And it really can dampen our spirits. And if you are a little girl that speaks out or speaks up, then you're labeled as a troublemaker or talks too much in class, disruptive, or sassy or disrespectful. I was like, hold on a minute. We need to redefine what disrespectful and all of those things mean. You're trying to tamper. So we're tampering these voices. And so by the time they get old enough where they really are, it is even more important for them to speak up and speak out and be responsible for themselves. We've tamped it right out of them by these boxes I talked about earlier. So tell me your thoughts on that. Go ahead, Rachelle, go first, and then we'll come back to Glen.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I was always that little girl that was speaking up when I wasn't supposed to. But it's not that I wasn't saying anything that wasn't true. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yes.
It's just, I guess there's just a time and a place, But yeah, it's important to speak up. It's important to listen. It's important to observe, but it's also important to speak up, so people don't take advantage and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so that you understand and you're not missing something,
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, love that. Go ahead, Glenn, and then I have a thought I was going to share. But go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry. That's
Oh,
a pretty big cat.
It's just that she's close.
She's so pretty.
Michelle's cat's like, hey, they're talking about some important stuff in there. I want to join the conversation.
She just turned 2 yesterday. So yeah.
She's a teenage cat.
Very cute. Mm-hmm. Well, I was I'm naturally shy and introverted, so I was a pretty quiet child, and that's where my observation skills came to play. Yeah. And so I just watched and listened, and even though I disagreed with some things that were going on, and I had my own opinions, I kept them to myself, and I stayed true to that because that's what resonated with me, not what people said to do. I mean, I was a child. I did what I was told most of the time to survive. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I didn't buy into that as that was the way for me to live. So there were a lot of choices I made as I grew up and became old enough to make those decisions and to act on them. And so what I really would love for people to do more of these days is to listen to themselves, see that small, still, quiet voice, and not just accept what's thrown at them, what's handed down to them, and what they're told they should be like or doing or say or think. We have intuition for a reason.
Yeah.
Use it.
Yeah. It's meant to be a tool.
It's the greatest tool.
It really is. But that's another thing I think, again, we're told not to trust ourselves. We're being, our voice will lead us astray. If you're in a lot of faith spaces, will tell you that, that's the sinful nature speaking up. If you're feeling like you should be doing something different than what you're told. I mean, there's all kinds of narratives that we get.
That's true. Yeah.
That move us away from trusting what our inner knowing has been trying to tell us all along. I had a really, really valuable experience a few years back. I worked with a group called Her Story when I lived on Long Island in New York. And Her Story uses memoir writing to help people tell their stories with the idea behind it that it really helps change hearts and minds when it comes to policies, laws, all kinds of things. And it's used in all kinds of narratives. And this particular narrative was, had just been trained to be a facilitator, and it was myself and another woman. She was doing her grad work, and she and I were working with a group of middle school students, mostly girls, and they had been, they had been labeled as quote unquote difficult. And I was like, oh, this will be interesting. Because I was like, because I was difficult one time too, or quote unquote. And so we got in this room, and it was these girls who basically were just trying to be heard, but because they were bringing up and they were challenging narratives. They were challenging rules that didn't make sense. They were challenging outright biases that were happening to them, whether it was socioeconomic, whether it was race, whether it was faith-based, whatever it was, there was these biases that were coming up in their school systems by teachers. And I love our educators, don't get me wrong, but there are just places and spaces that when you're working with a group of 25 to 30 kids, that sometimes these things happen. You don't get a chance to just listen to everybody's story all the time, to really get curious as to why they might be acting out in a certain way, or asking that challenging question, or what it is in your own story that is informing the way you're seeing them right now that may not be accurate. I mean, and so this was a space where they got the chance to use memoir writing as a tool to tell their story. And when they realized that they got to tell their story, their truth about their experience that was happening to them and how they were experiencing, and it was so empowering. One of the girls And these guys were 12 to 14. Most of the girls, there's one little 12-year-old guy. God, he was just precious. And for him, it was the stereotype of being vulnerable as a boy. And he was already the really smart kid and the brainiac. And his parents really wanted him doing all these STEM things, but he really needed this place to find his own voice and talk about all the ways that well-meaning people in his life were trying to steer him STEM-wise, but nothing was getting tended to on his creative side or his feelings or his emotions. So he got to have a voice there. And these girls, it was very sweet the way they kind of took him in as their little brother. And they all went to school together. And the way they saw each other now in the hallways, the way they saw their stories, these girls, a couple of the girls didn't like each other. And junior high girls, that can be a whole mess. And so my facilitator and I are like, oh Lord, what have we gotten into? I'm like, well, I've got 3 daughters and I got them all through junior high and high school. So maybe I can tap into some of that energy. But also, okay, listen, this is going to be a space when you walk in here, this is a respectful space. Whatever idea you've decided about the person sitting next to you outside of these doors, we're going to put that away. And we're going to start fresh. And we're going to let each of you have your voice, have your say without judgment, and just, tell your story. This is a safe space. It doesn't leave this room. Only talk about the things that feel safe for you. And through that time together, they were able to find their voices again. They were able to believe and understand that someday they would be able to choose their spaces and they would be able to choose who they surrounded themselves with. And that an authority figure telling them something about themselves didn't make it true. And it was just like, geez, we only got to work with this group of 6 kids. I'm like, these kids need these places but it's an example, and it's a long story of what happens to us so many times as little girls. So by the time it's time for us to advocate ourselves, we got to find it again because of all these different things and stigmas and labels we've been given. And we're like, and you get focused on, oh my gosh, I better behave. So X, Y, and Z, and behave, can sometimes just look like being quiet and not feeling like you deserve to be heard. So I think it's just that recognizing that piece too.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're pretty much what our parents have taught us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And until we get older and learn something new and different outside of that, we don't know anything different. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And trying to, like Glenn said, trying to survive, trying to
Mm-hmm.
get through, but also holding on to that. And I love that, Glenn, that you were able to hold on to that piece of you that knew. And Rachelle, you were able to keep asking questions like, no, this isn't working for me. None of you are giving me answers that are acceptable to the way I want to live my life, the way I want to feel. I know there are answers. I know there's a why behind this. I need somebody who's willing to get curious with me and go, on this journey. And that is something we deserve to have. That is not us that's the other thing. If you get too curious or you ask too many questions, you're labeled as difficult. Oh, she's difficult. My mother-in-law was very much seen by doctors because holistic medicine and other alternatives weren't really available to her generation. And she just passed in 2023. And later on in life, they became more so, but for most of her life. So she was always the difficult patient, according to her doctors. And my husband tells stories because, he's like, Mom, and he loves that about her. He's like, she wasn't leaving there without an answer or a different solution or why behind it. And it's like, why is that difficult? Why aren't we welcoming the questions? Put egos aside and assumptions aside. And if you're not working with somebody, not just in the medical field, but in your workspaces, in your friend groups, in your relationships that want to hear your voice and value your voice and trust your voice and believe you, then think about that and surround yourself with people that are for you and support you and are with you and want to be part of your team. I think that's such a vital thing. Rachelle, did you have any questions for Glen on anything she said today, or statements or follow-ups that you want to say?
No, I just I love where she was tapping into the spirituality aspect of healing as well. I think that's also very important. People don't understand how everything just works all together, as she was saying. Yeah, that's really great to emphasize that in particular.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. We got to tend to all the parts of ourselves,
Mhm.
and they all have equal value. I mean, I think the physical health gets a lot of attention because that's where the most, historically, the most treatment's been available in.
Mhm.
But that doesn't make the other areas less valuable. There
Nope.
just isn't as much experience in addressing those, but they're all pieces of the puzzle. And I think, we hear a lot of terms now like generational trauma and things that get passed on generation to generation because the generations before us didn't have the resources. And so they may have continued behaviors and habits and choices that weren't healthy, but it's all they knew. Or there was an environment where it wasn't considered healthy or safe to talk about your mental health, or to talk about needing an alternative way of getting access to things. There just wasn't that safe space for that to happen. And so also like looking at our own lives and being like, all right, where can I break? So what are some of these things that are showing up for me that are unhealthy? You both, Glen, you mentioned the inner child work. Rachelle, you mentioned the somatic healing piece. Somatic healing was a big part of my journey. I once I started opening up to when my nervous system really started feeling safe to start processing and moving through these things. I was working with a therapist. I was going through EMDR, which is a form of treatment that worked well for me. All these things, my body, like physically, was manifesting all of these numbness, tightness, pain, all these things. I'm like, what is happening? I thought I was having a stroke or something. I was just like, what is happening here? And it was as I was able to peel back different layers, these different symptoms would subside or go away. There's some I haven't felt for years. Others that show up on certain occasions, but I now understand what they're attached to. So it's just that, being curious about those things and asking questions and getting deeper, but also recognizing, okay, what hasn't served my generation? Where's a place where I can break that and start a new way of existing and stop that trauma from carrying on and carrying on and carrying on and do things differently. And you're going to, sometimes when we want to do that, well, there'll be pushback from family members or friends or people that have done it. It's been that way for generations. We've always done it that way. You always show up for these people. You don't ever let that happen. And it's like, okay, but is this serving my health and well-being? And will it serve future generations ahead of me's health and well-being? And asking those questions. And so you all have spoken to all of that so beautifully. And that's really this difference makers piece. It's taking those experiences, following those intuitions, and helping other people, but also not being afraid to speak up and do differently and do better for yourself. And when someone pushes back, that doesn't mean you're wrong. That just might mean, Do you guys want to say anything about that before we wrap up today?
It's our responsibility to our health journey is our individual responsibility. Whether people agree with it or not, if it is the right thing for you to do, keep doing it. And you will find your tribe of supportive, nurturing people. And even the people who initially push back on your health journey, if they truly align with your best interest and your highest self, they will join you.
Yeah. Good
so
stuff.
It is our responsibility to keep keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Rachelle, what about you?
I think everybody has instincts and they don't always follow or listen to their instincts. But if they did, then they might just change the course of their whole life, you know? So yeah, definitely figure out what it is that that special feeling that you get around people that you either may or may not feel comfortable with, or situations you may find yourself in. Just pay attention to your body and how it reacts,
Mm-hmm.
and pay attention to your instinct and follow your instinct. And one more thing is that even though we all think we know how to breathe, breath work
Mm.
goes a long way to heal many different issues: sleep,
Absolutely.
anxiety, depression, so many different things. If we would just learn how to breathe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so important. I tell you what, I did not realize the power of that until I realized that my breath gets really shallow. And sometimes we even hold our breaths when we're stressed and we don't even realize it. I started to practice probably 4 years ago, where I would set, because I had a period of time as I was starting to really do the work where I realized I lived in a hypervigilant state. I started the day up here rather than down here. And then from here went to here. And it was like, all right, we've got to interrupt. Even while I'm unpacking these things, I'm not going to heal overnight. But what can I do day to day to help my system as I'm going through this and still live my life? I mean, I had a full-time job and, kids in college and a husband. And I'm like, I can't just drop everything and do this work. I've got to still keep paying the bills and doing my life. And I would set the timer and I would stop once an hour to do some box breathing to reset my nervous system. That was something that worked for me. And you realize, okay, I'm carrying all this tension right here. I haven't taken a deep breath since the last time I did this an hour ago. And gosh, dang, there's so much power in just resetting your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
But breathing, yeah, so good. So good. Thank you for that. We could talk all day about this. There's so many resources. But thank you so much, both of you, for your contributions to this important conversation. I'm going to let both of you share where people can find you. This will also be on our show notes here on our YouTube channel, the Embracing Layers Network. It's going to be via our social media on our website. You can find all those things there. To access this information, if you're curious about listening to these ladies' podcast or to working with them directly. But Glen, let people know where they can find you, and then Rachelle, do the same.
Okay. Well, you can visit my website, glenalex.com, and it has links on there for the Glen Alex Show, which is on YouTube and the major podcast platforms. I do have free downloads that you can download on cognitive distortions, boundaries, progress, self-talk. And so please feel free to access that. And you can also request a complimentary consultation with me. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky, and LinkedIn.
Awesome. All right. Lots of places to find Glen. Rachelle,
Yes.
How about you?
Yeah, so my website is askahealth.coach, and my podcast is on Spotify, the Get Your Healthy Life podcast. And definitely reach out if you have any questions. I offer one-on-one, group, or there's also a course for anybody who's interested. I have books. I have a planner, journal for anybody trying to work through their chronic fatigue syndrome. But I also offer a 15-minute free discovery call and a consultation if need be.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you both so much for being with me here today. Like I said, we could have talked all day about this, but I wanted to have you talk about these areas and the way you approach them, because these areas and these questions and being curious and having a voice and standing up for yourself are vital in every part of your life. And we can all do this, ladies. And that might be the way you make the difference, by simply having a voice and speaking your truth and advocating for yourself, advocating for others that maybe they're having a hard time finding their confidence. And so you can be there to support them and lift them up, not allow others to interrupt them in a meeting. I mean, those are simple little things that really go. If you've got daughters, being really careful about how you talk to them and the messages you're sending them when they come with a concern or a grievance or some emotions that need to be walked through. Remembering that what we tell them now stays with them and impacts them. So how are you going to help them navigate being kind, respectful kids? But that doesn't mean being quiet. That doesn't mean not having a voice. That doesn't mean that they don't have feelings that need to be learned to walk through and that are valid. And so it's so many important pieces of this today, but I hope this helps you see all the ways that you can participate in this, and we can all be difference makers in our own spaces, and trust yourselves. Both you, Glen and Rachelle, today have spoken about that. Trust that intuition, trust that angst, trust that inner knowing. It is there to help you, and it is trustworthy. Utilize it. Your body's not for you or not against you. It's for you. It is for you, and it's sending you clues and messages. Don't ignore them. Use them to help you and guide you, and surround yourself with people that support your curiosity and your value in being seen and heard. And so I hope that's the takeaway today. Thank you both, ladies, so much for this conversation. I appreciate you both so much and how you show up in the world.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate you and your work.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you
so much.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Check out these podcasts, ladies, too. If nothing else, if you're not, on your next walk, check these things out. Check out these resources. You're driving to work, dropping the kids off at soccer. Use that time you've already got to check out these great resources. But think of how you can use your voice this week. Advocate for yourself. Know that you're worth it. Take care and have a great week.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.